All right, we'll say good morning, a good tevach. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan. Doctors Steve and Teri Czinn, with gratitude to Hashem as they welcome their fifth grandchild, Gavriel Amichai Czinn, and a loving memory of Dr. Zinn's mother, Doris Czinn, Devorah, Bas Rabbi Yisroel Yoel, Yisroel Yoel, Shaindy and Avraham Kelman, from Yerushalayim Kodesh, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Avram's father, Rephael Yechiel ben Avram, Tzirel Bluma, and our week of learning sponsors, Berel Rachel Galkin, and the zechus for refuah shleima for their nephew, Chaim Meir ben Tzirel Bluma. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, all of the Neshama Shav and Aliyah, the families Zein Chama. Kadosh Baruch Hu should Hashem make this a week of Besoros Tovos Klal Yisrael, in which our hostages are returned back to their families, our soldiers are successful, B'chol Ma'asei Yodehem, and Klal Yisrael is delivered a decisive victory over all who rise up against our holy nation and our holy people. Let's say with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. It's incredible to think this is our last week of Metzia. Last, not even a full week. Last couple of days of Metzia. Today's daf is Kuf Tez Zayin 116. We are picking up on 116a. Sit here. I think I just have to bring it closer. I'm sorry. Sorry, I just have to bring it closer. Yeah, sorry. My bad. Wow, it's a tough crowd. Imagine what would have happened days before microphones. It's all right. I'm sorry. So we are picking up 2, 4, 6 lines down from the top on 116a. Tanya Kavase de Rabbi Yehuda. So let's remember again, in yesterday's Gemara there was an interesting discussion regarding how many lavim one is in violation of. Again, let's just take one further step back. Our entire parak, which we are about to Messiah, has been focusing on the concept that when you take collateral, there are limitations. The type of collateral you're allowed to take. Right? There's limitation. You're never allowed to deprive someone of something that they need. What's the definition of need? So need could be for livelihood, or need could be just for activities of daily living. Furthermore, again, we saw other restrictions that again, as an individual, I'm never allowed to seize collateral. Whether that means going over to someone and taking something from them, in the marketplace, in the street, or certainly entering into their home. Beis Din has a different set of halachas. Now what Rabbi Yehuda was coming along and talking about was the concept that if you go ahead and you seize collateral, specifically, again, in this case, the millstones, how many prohibitions are you in violation of? So Rabbi Yehuda wants to say that, remember again, there's a specific lav regarding the seizure of millstones, and then there's a general lav about going ahead and depriving someone of something they require for their livelihood. Good. So therefore, again, it says lo yachbor rechayim berechav ki nefesh uchova. So Rabbi Yehuda wants to say it's one lav. It's one lav. Or really, we're going to see 2 lavim, but 1 lav. The Gemara says as follows. Watch this. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda. Chaval zug shel saparim v'tzemed shel paros. So we'll say here's the interesting case. Let's say you seized barber's scissors. Now we'll say the chap with barber scissors was fine. Take a quick look at Rashi. Chaval zug shel saparim misparayim shel saparim ve'hein shel prakim v'chol echad kli ba'api nafshi v'osin hamalacha bein shneim kerechayim v'rechav. So this is interesting. So barber scissors. How did you put together a pair of barber scissors? This is actually interesting. Barber scissors really are essentially two knives that are attached with some type of swivel, if that's the right technical term. Each knife has its own identity as a kli. So therefore, again, the Gemara says, and similarly, again, semen shel paros, the yoke of a cow, Rashi points out over here, was also, a yoke was comprised of 2 pieces. So when you went ahead and you seized barber scissors, or you seized the yoke of a cow, in essence, you were going ahead and seizing 2 kalim. Because each item has its own identity as a kli. Therefore, chayiv shtayim, one will be chayiv twice for going ahead and seizing these utensils. Take a look at Rashi. Chayiv shtayim mishum ki nefesh al kol echad. Because we'll say the idea of ki nefesh hu chovel, which is that lav, ultimately devolves upon each of these items. Even though, again, the 2 represent one kli, but because each of them has their own distinct identity as a kli, therefore seizure of the scissors represents seizure of 2 kelim. Seizure of the yoke represents the seizure of 2 utensils. Therefore, you're going to be chayiv twice. Again, back to Rashi. Mishum ki nefesh al kol echad v'afapi sheshnehem tzrichen lemalacha achas. Even though, obviously, you can't give a haircut with one blade of the scissors, right? So, right, you can't go ahead and plow the field with one part of the yoke. So the Gemara says, "V'chein seven shel paros, chaval beis paros charshos im tzmadan dahainu nami kli ochal nefesh v'nira be'inesh." Fine, so good. So the Gemara says, "Seven shel chayv shtayim zeh ba'atzmo v'zeh ba'atzmo." What happens if you just seize one piece, one blade of a scissor, one piece of the yoke? Then what's the halacha? Einu chayiv ela achos. You only chayiv once. Okay, that's the first brayso. Tanya idach, another brayso. Chaval zug shel saparim and seven shel paros. If you take a pair of barber scissors or a yoke of a cow as collateral, yachol lo yeh chayiv ela achos. You might have thought that you'd only be chayiv once. Only be chayiv once. So the Gemara says, "Talmud lomar lo yachbol rechayim v'rechav." Therefore, the pasuk says, ultimately again, you shall not seize as collateral the upper millstone or the lower millstone. So ma rechaim v'rechav. So first, I'll take a look at another Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Tanya idach diolaflu merechaim v'rechav the iskus shar dvar merechaim v'rechav b'chad kra. So listen, now watch this. We're going to see when the Torah wants to single out the concept of going ahead and seizing something for collateral that a person uses for their livelihood. Ki nefesh uchovel. Torah uses the example of a millstone. Now we'll say, now you have to ask yourself why. Right? Why is that the paradigmatic example? So now the Brayso says, I'm going to tell you why. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, Ma rechayim v'rechav shem yuchadim shnei kelim va'osim malacha achos. What's unique about the millstones? What's unique about the millstones are that there are two distinct utensils that together perform one malacha. So it's two distinct pieces, but you need both of those pieces in order to perform the malacha. V'chayiv azeh b'fnei atzmo, v'azeh b'fnei atzmo. And there's a separate lav. There's a separate lav for each millstone. So in other words, even though only when you put the millstones together can they perform their prescribed task, but yet, interestingly enough, they are looked at separately, so that when you seize millstones from the borrower, you actually chayiv twice. The Gemara says, "Af kol dvarim shein shnei kelim yuchadin va'osam malacha achos chayiv azeh b'fnei atzmo v'azeh b'fnei atzmo." So I'll say, interestingly enough, havacha l'maisa, the Gemara says, essentially creates a paradigm. The paradigm is that you might have thought that if you have two utensils that combined perform one joint malacha, and both of them are necessary to perform the malacha, that if you take them, you're only chayiv once. Because essentially you've seized one unit of livelihood. Kamash malon, that if you seize an item that is made up of two distinct parts, and each part essentially has its own identity, you are chayiv twice for the seizure. So again, where does that come from? The fact that the Torah goes out of its way to go ahead and use the millstones as the example of prohibited seizure of collateral. So again, this is not going to apply to, I don't know, it doesn't sound like it's going to apply to so many cases. The Gemara only brings up two, barber scissors and the yoke, but Lamai said that's the paradigm, and that's Rabbi Yehuda. Incredible. But it's an interesting story. Hahu Gavra, the Chaval Sakina de Ashkafta Mechavre. So I'll say there was a guy who sees, it's interesting, Sakina da Ashkafta. Sakina is a knife. Ashkafta means death. So it says Sakina da Ashkafta, a shchita knife. It's interesting lashon. I don't know, for some reason I feel like other places in Shas that they just describe it as a sakin de shchina. But okay, shchita. Anyway, so somebody went ahead and took, Rashi says over here, Sakina da Ashkafta shal beis hamatbachim shemekabtzim babasar. So truth is also here, Rashi explains it not as a shchita knife, but rather as a butcher knife. A butcher knife. Okay, fine. So a guy came along, so Reuven came along and took a shechita knife from Shimon, right? Reuven lent money to Shimon. Shimon wasn't paying back. So Reuven went ahead and seized the butcher knife from Shimon. Okay. So they came before Abaye. So now Abaye says, so obviously the butcher knife represents what? The butcher knife represents a kli that someone uses for their livelihood. So B'pashtas now again, Shimon wants his butcher knife back. So what's the halacha? Amarle zila hadre tahavele klisha osim ba'ochel nefesh v'ta kum bedina law. So Abaye said like this. Abaye said, Reuven, give Shimon back the knife, because this is a livelihood kli. You have to give him back, and then you could bring Shimon to Beis Din. You could sue him in Beis Din for the debt. Rashi says, "V'takum bedina." Rashi, the last short line in Rashi, "To'avu aledin al chovach im modalo or im yesh edim yishalim v'im lav yishav shvuas hasis." So essentially, Abai says like this: Reuven's creditor, Reuven, got to give back the knife. That's the one. Give back the knife, because the knife is a livelihood kli. So that's one. Number 2, take Shimon to Beis Din. Now, what are Reuven's options in Beis Din? So Rashi is actually a great Rashi. Rashi really spells this out. Rashi says over here are your options, right? Ultimately, again, if Shimon admits that he owes you money, great. Okay, so you'll figure out some type of payment plan. If he doesn't admit that you owe him money, and the halach is that now that what? And if you have witnesses, great, you collect like that. If he doesn't admit it, and there are no witnesses, so what is your recourse? Ultimately, again, swear. Swear, right? You could take a shvuas hasis, ultimately, again, and take a shvuas hasis. Fine, those are the options. Rava says, no. Lo tzarich l'mekeh medina, Allah, v'yachal liton ad kedei demehen. So we'll say, Rava highlights something very interesting over here. Rava comes along and says, no. So we'll say, here's the problem with Abaye's, what's Rava's problem with Abaye's position? See, Abaye essentially deprives the lender, Reuven, of any legal strength, right? Because think about this. What does Reuven have to do? Reuven has to return the collateral and essentially go back to Beis Din and kind of like start from scratch, right? He's got to essentially prove that Shimon owes him this money, because obviously that's the case we're talking about over here, because Lamaisa, if Reuven was holding on to a shtar, if he was holding on to a collection document, it's okay, as they say, there's nothing to talk about if you're holding on to a collection document. So obviously, Reuven sees the collateral because he's not getting anywhere with Shimon. So Abaye is saying, give him back the collateral, go back to Beis Din, you kind of have to start from square one. So Rava says, no, why should you have to start from square one? Watch this. Lo tzarich l'mekim bedina Allah v'yachal liton ad kedei demehen. So Rava says like this. Well, say, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Rava Amar, kevan demashkene ve'ein edim shemashkeno, hayayachal liton lekucha hi biyadi, lo tzarich l'mekam bedina iluya, dekana le'mashkon lishava v'lita ad kedei damav. So we'll say, it's incredible. So Rava says, the truth is, Reuven has a very strong leg to stand on. Why? So we'll say, Reuven admits that he seized the knife as collateral. But Reuven could have also made another claim. What could have been his claim? I bought it. I bought them. It's my knife. It's not Shimon's knife. It's my knife. I bought it. And I will say again. And what would have been the halacha? What would have been the halacha had Reuven made the claim that he bought the knife from Shimon? What would have been the halacha? Shimon, you want to look? Remember again, possession is 9/10 of the law. Reuven has the knife. Shimon's claiming it's not yours. Okay, Shimon, so you prove it. So Reuven could have made the claim that the knife was his, right? But he doesn't. Instead, what he does is he makes the claim that the knife is collateral. So I say, so it's almost like a shtickle migo over here, right? So therefore, again, Rava says, listen, Reuven is certainly entitled to collect the debt, at least up to the amount and value of the knife itself, right? Because since technically speaking, he could have held on to the knife, claimed l'kuchehi biyadi, and Shimon would have really had no recourse. When he claimed this collateral, he at least is entitled to the debt up to the amount of the knife. Now, if the debt, any amount of the debt that surpasses the value of the knife, okay, then that's going to require some level of adjudication. Quite incredible. So the Gemara says, "Va'abaye lesle ha'isvara." So does Abaye not hold? So we'll say, so Rav says again. Let's say, see this incredible machlokes. Abaye says, and by the way, Rav is not disagreeing that you have to give back livelihood collateral. He's not disagreeing with that. What he's saying is, in this case, where there's no proof as to what anything that's happened, Abaye and the lender has the knife, he has the ability to claim, I bought it. When he admits that it's only collateral, then halacha l'maisa, that should give him credibility to collect a claim up to the value of the knife itself. So the Gemara says, Abaye lesle ha'usvara. Why doesn't Abaye agree with this? And as Rav is saying good. According to Abaye, Reuven has to give back the knife to Shimon, go to Beis Din, and essentially start from scratch. Why doesn't he agree with Rava? So the Gemara says, Maishna mehano easy, the achli chushla ben arda. So I'll say, why is it different in the following case? So there was a guy, right? Let's call it Shimon. Right? Shimon had goats, and Shimon's goats went and ate of the grain, and ate in the field of Reuven. Va'asamar de chushla, v'tafas lehu. And Reuven came along and he seized the goats. It's like your goats destroyed my wheat field. So Reuven seized the goats, the katoin tuva, and ultimately again, and he was claiming obviously the amount He was claiming the amount of the grain that was destroyed. Ve'amar Avur de Shmuel, and Avur de Shmuel said, Yachol liton ad kedei d'mehen. Ultimately, again, so Rabbi says the same thing in this case over here. Reuben has the ability to claim the value of destroyed wheat up until the value of the goats, right? Since Reuben is in possession of the goats, and he could just as easily claim that what? The goats were sold to me, right? L'kucha ben biyadi, but he's not claiming, he's admitting, I seized it in satisfaction of a debt, therefore he is entitled to the debt up to the amount, up to the value of the goats. So you see that this is a concept. So why doesn't Abaye hold of this? So Rabbi said it's very interesting. Hasam lav midi da'avdi la'oshli ula'ogri. Hacha midi da'avdi la'oshli v'la'ogri. So Abaye says it's a very big difference. The reason why this works in the case of the goats, Rabbi is why people don't lend their goats. Right? People don't lend their goats. Right? In other words, you go over to your friend, you say, listen, you know what, can I borrow your goat for the day? I don't know, the family's away, whatever it is, so on my side, can I borrow your goat for the day? So people don't do that. People don't really, they don't lend out livestock. So therefore, there's only really one of two ways in which livestock is. So therefore, I would say, if Reuven's goat, or Shimon's goat is in Reuven's possession, so the Pashtos, Shimon didn't lend it to him. So what's a more plausible explanation as to why Shimon's goat is in Reuven's possession? He sold it. He bought it. Right, he bought it. So therefore, again, when Reuven has those goats, the halacha almost views it as if Reuven is the one who bought it. Now, Reuven is admitting, I didn't buy it. I seized it in satisfaction of a debt because Shimon, your goats destroyed my wheat. So that's the kind of case where halacha l'maisa, then Reuven, that's a strong claim. However, when you're dealing in a case where halacha l'maisa, a kli that is usually lent out, so therefore Rabbi is claiming that because it's in your possession, it means that you could have claimed that you bought it is not a bona fide claim. So therefore, again, what Abaye posits is like this: knives, people lend out knives. So because of that, when Reuven has Shimon's knife, so Reuven can't claim. You see, it's in my possession and I bought it. Why? Because there's another plausible explanation. What's the other plausible explanation? That Shimon lent it to him, because people lend knives. So because of that, that's why Abaye, even though Abaye conceptually agrees with this construct, Abaye will not apply it to the shechita knife case. Because the whole, right, Rava's whole chap is, since Reuven could have claimed, right, that I bought the knife, therefore when he admits that I didn't buy it, I seized it as collateral, he's entitled to collect the debt up until the value of the knife. Any amount beyond that he's going to have to prove in court. So Abaye says, but that's not true. Because there's another plausible explanation that Shimon could advance, which is, I didn't sell you the knife, I lent you the knife. Therefore, Reuven's claim that I could have said I owned it really doesn't hold water, because that claim could have been countered with the claim, I just lent it to you. Therefore, that's why Abaye says to Reuven in this case, give back to Shimon the knife, because it's a livelihood kli, and go back to Beis and essentially adjudicate your case from the beginning. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, the Shalach Rav Huna Bar, and here it is. Devarim ha'asuyin lahashir lahaskir va'amar lekuchen hein biyadi einon emon. They both say in general, whenever you have items that are commonly lent, and let's say the person was in possession of it says, possession is 9/10 of the law. It's in my possession, therefore I own it. We say, no, you don't. Because if it's a kli that is normally lent, it is just as probable or possible to say that you borrowed it and not that you own it. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, you can't undo it. That's why Abaye rejects Rava's approach in the case of the shechita knife. The Gemara says, Varava lesle hasvara, but does Rava not hold of this? So now the problem's on Rava, right? Because remember, again, let's go back for a second. So now, Reuven lent Shimon money, Shimon hasn't paid, Reuven seized Shimon's shechita knife. So what did Rava say? Rava said, okay, Reuven, you are entitled to go ahead and collect the value of the shechita, the debt up to the value of the shechita knife. Why? Because you could have claimed that you bought the shechita knife. But one second, we just said that items that are normally borrowed and lent, there's no claim that, I could have claimed that it was mine. That claim evaporates. So doesn't Rava hold of that? So why does Rava hold that Reuven is entitled to collect the debt up to the value of the shechita knife? So this is very interesting. The Gemara says, Rava does hold to this svar. Rava, apik zuga de sarbala, the safra da agarata miyasmi, bidvar ma'asuyin lahashil lahaskir. I will say, because the Gemara tells a story, again, unrelated story. Well, it's not unrelated. Rava one time went ahead and extracted a cloak and a sefer of agarata from Yisomim, gave them back to their original owner, because even though the Yisomim claimed that ultimately, again, it was theirs, these are items that are normally lent, and therefore he gave it back to the original owner. The point is, Rava also agrees with this concept, that when it comes to items that are normally lent one to the other, possession doesn't automatically give you a potential claim that, oh, you see, I bought it. Since it's normally lent, therefore, again, that claim that I bought it really evaporates. So, again, full circle. So let's come back to the shechita. So let's remain focused over here. So why is it by the shechita knife case? Remember again, Reuven lent Shimon $100, $1,000. So Reuven went ahead, Shimon's not paying. Reuven went and seized Shimon's shechita knife. They came before Rava. What did Rava say to do? So number one, you have to give back the knife, right? Why do you have to give back the knife? Why? Livelihood plea. You have to give back the knife. But, what's the but? You are entitled to collection of the debt up to the value of the knife. If the debt surpasses the value of the knife, you're going to have to go to Beis Din. But up to the value of the knife. Why? Because you had a strong halachic claim. What was your halachic claim? You could have claimed that what? The knife was mine. And walked away. And you could have been the proud owner of a new butcher knife, and you could have sold it. The fact that you admit that it's not yours, right? Like amigo type of situation. But 1 second, Rava, how can you hold that? Because you just proved that what? Rava says you can't make that kind of claim with items that are normally lent, right? Because since they're normally borrowed and lent, therefore, halacha l'maisa, you can't claim, oh, you see, I bought it, because it's just as probable that's what? That you borrowed it. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Rava, no. Hai nami kevan de mifkima kapti inchi below moshli. Now, we'll say, you have to understand something. A shechita knife, or a butcher knife for that matter, is not something that people lend out. That's why, by the way, it makes more sense to say that this is a sugya regarding shechita knives. Right? So remember again, a shechita knife you have to be very careful with, because if a shechita knife develops a nick, it could totally go ahead and invalidate the shechita. And obviously, invalidating a shechita, in general, whenever you have an invalidated shechita, so it costs a lot of money. Right now, if the animal is a treifa, it's the animals, it's okay. But if the shochet did it, because of the way that he did shechita, that's human error, that's a significant loss. So therefore, Rava says, people don't lend the shechita knives. They don't lend shechita knives. So therefore, again, a shechita knife would be an item that people don't lend. And because it's an item that people don't lend, therefore, halacha l'maisa, when Reuven does have it, he could have made the claim, L'kucha hi biyadi, I bought it, it's mine. The fact that he admits that it's not his, but instead, halacha l'maisa what? But instead, I seized it as collateral, therefore he's entitled to collect the debt up to the value of the shechita knife. So I will say, and that seems to be the conclusion over here of the Gemara, that since halacha l'maisa, he could have claimed the value, right? He could have claimed l'kucha hi biyadi. Therefore, again, in this case, he is entitled to the debt up to the value. And I will say, I just want to point out, this is all talking about a situation where, of course, we don't have a shtar, right? If we had a document, then that would be something different, right? But l'maisa, again, so Reuven is entitled to claim the debt up to the value of the knife. Anything beyond that, he would have to go to Beis Din and go through the mechanisms described above. And God will say, Hadrun alach hamakabel. He will say, Mazel tov. He will say, it also tells you something very interesting over here. This last piece, that people don't lend out stuff that could get ruined. People don't lend out. So I don't lend out my shechita knife because ultimately, again, it could get ruined. He will say, I think it's also like a tremendous Moshe Haskell. Just sometimes we allow like our neshama to be placed in situations that it should not be placed in. Right? We kind of lend out the neshama a little bit, assuming that the neshama is not going to get nicked, the neshama is not going to get damaged. People always have to be careful with things that could get easily damaged. They don't lend it out. They keep it close to the chest. They hold it. I want to be a charitable and kind person, but with things where if they get damaged, the cost is quite significant. I'm going to be much more careful with what I do with it. If that's true for the shechita knife, alachas kama v'kama, elokain neshama shenasata bi torahi. Right, the thing I have to be careful with about getting nicked or getting damaged most is my neshama. So be careful where you put it, right, and be careful, quote unquote, who you lend it out to, and be careful what you allow it to get exposed to, because one little nick, one little thing creates so much damage, not irreversible damage, right? Because Baruch Hashem, there's always tshuva. But l'maisa, if a person is going to be makbid on the shechita knife, where one little nick could ruin a shechita, alachas kama v'kama, how careful I have to be where I allow my neshama to go, and the exposures and the influences that I allowed to be around it. Incredible. We'll say, Mazda, brand new parak. I will say, it is very exciting. This is our last parak of Bava Metzia. Our last parak. Okay. Let's go. Good. Kuf Tesayin base 116b. Habai Yisrael. I will say some actually really great real estate cases here. Habai Yisrael Yeshel Shnai. Okay, here we go. Two-story house. Reuven lives on the upper story. Shimon lives on the lower story. Okay, they're partners, right? Jointly owned property. Rashi says over here, Habai Yisrael Yeshel Shnai. Kigon Shnei Achim Shechalku Echad Natal Bayis ve'Echad Natal Aliyah Shal Gabav Va'avonim Shel Chomos Habayis Min Tikras Habayis HaTachtona Shi Karki Isa Shel Aliyah. Well, fine. So Rashi points it out over here as two brothers who inherited a house, but it doesn't matter. Reuven and Shimon could also be friends, and they decided to buy a piece of property together. Two-story home. Reuven lives on the top story. Shimon lives on the lower story. What happens? Shenaflu. The house fell down. Baruch Hashem, everybody's okay. Everybody is okay. Baruch Hashem. But the house fell down. So now what's the shayla? The shayla is, what do you do with the materials? How do we deal with that? So what's the halacha? Cholkim be'itzim ba'anavim uba'afar. So we split up everything, right? So literally again, we split the wood, we split the stones, and we split afar. Means the dirt. We're going to see what that really means is like the mortar. So in other words, we split all the materials. The roen elu avanim ha'asuyos leishtaber. And the Rebbe says it's actually very interesting. Now the assumption is like this: in the pile of rubble, there's going to be whole stones and broken stones. So we look at ultimately again, which part of the structure do we think is most probable that the whole stones are from and that the broken stones are from? So we'll say, we're gonna discuss this. We're gonna discuss. Well, I'll just tell you this right now. There's two ways that the structure could fall. It could either collapse, right, which is essentially what they call like pancaking, right? It could just fall onto itself, or it could topple over. Now, the interesting part is like this: if it pancakes and it just collapses down, then bepashtos, it's the stones on the bottom that are broken, right? Because of the impact and of the pressure. If it topples, then bepashtos, it's the upper stones that are broken, just because of the height in which they fell and the impact that'll break. That's the idea that the Mishnah is operating on. So therefore, again, halacha l'maaseh, if it pancakes, then we assume that the majority of broken stones really belong to Shimon, the lower story guy. If it topples, the majority of broken stones ultimately are really going to be the possession of Reuven, the upper story guy. Again, we'll get into this more. Now, what happens if one of them, right, Reuven, let's say, says, oh, you know what, I recognize that's my stone. In other words, I recognize that stone, however he's recognizing it, right? His kid drew a picture on it, on the interior of it, right? Or he carved his initials on it, whatever it is. Or he just knows, he'll say, remember again also, we're used to like mass production of things, so things could look the same. You see this also, you can see this, by the way, if you ever walk through Mamila. So if you notice in Mamila, you can still see it there, there's writing on the stones. Right, so those stones, right? The incredible part about those stones is they're different sizes and different dimensions. So each one has to be put like in a different place. So in Pashtos again, you can recognize a stone. So you know, so ultimately again, okay, so you identify a stone, so you take that's yours, and it counts towards your tally. Now we're going to discuss what that means in just a moment. So the Gemara says, 1 second, let's analyze this. Mediktani roin mechlal diika lemeka malayu. Ibe chabasa nafil, ibe chabata nafil. So we'll say, so now remember again. So look, the second part of the Mishnah says, we look as to which stones would have had the greatest possibility of breaking. So we'll say, so the Gemara used lashon of chavasa or chabata. Chavasa means pancaking, right? Pancaking, the building collapses on itself, versus chabata means toppling. So when we say rowan, okay, so we look, did it pancake or did it topple? Did it pancake or did it topple? So Lamaisa, then we could see, who has more of the broken stones. If that's the case, ihachi reisha amay cholkim. So again, I will say, here's the problem. The Reish at the beginning of the Mishnah said, Reuven and Shimon living in a two-story home, Reuven's living on top, Shimon's living on bottom. The structure falls down. What do? Chok, and we split it. And we'll say, what does split it sound like? What does split it sound like? Split everything. Right? So Reuven will get 50% of the whole stones and 50% of the broken stones, and Shimon, same thing. Yet then the Sefer says, no, depending on how the building fell, the structure fell, we look at who should get assigned a greater portion of the broken stones, and who should get... So understand, which one is it? Which one is it? So the Gemara says, so why don't we just say as follows? Why would you ever split? When the structure falls, nechsi, if the building toppled over, then aliyasa idbar, then ultimately the more broken stones are from the upper story. Ibechavas anafil, and if it pancaked, then tasyosa idbar, then ultimately again more broken stones should belong to the lower story. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Lo tzricha dinafal balayla, fell at night. Pakshim Reuben and Shimon were away, right? They were away. It fell at night. So because it fell at night, no one saw exactly how it fell. All right. So I don't understand. Just in the rubble itself, there's a difference between pancaked rubble versus toppled rubble. Just what's the word? Just from the we'll call it like collapse radius. Right? In other words, that like again, it's just when it topples the rubble. First of all, when it topples, the rubble is going to be spewed presumably in one direction, and further out. If it pancakes, it's going to be much more equidistant. So just look, to which the Gemara says, Dipaninhu. What happens? They cleaned it up. They cleaned it up quickly. So the Gemara says, V'lechse man paninhu. So why don't we say, so let's ask the people who cleaned up the rubble. What did you see? So the Gemara says, Dipaninhu b'nei rishus harabim. Va'azlu la'alma. So what happened? So we'll say, so if you can imagine, maybe the house was right by rishus harabim. So the rubble fell into rishus harabim. So who cleaned it up? People, like pedestrians, they just got it out of their way, and they went on with their lives. In other words, they're not here. They're not here to ask. So the Gemara says, "Lechsei b'rishus deman yasvan v'lehavi idach hamazim mechaver alav haraya." So we'll say, so why don't we see into whose property the rubble was cleared, and then ultimately again the other one will be hamazim mechaver alav haraya. To which the Gemara says, "Lo tzicha b'yasvan b'chaser detarvayhu." It could be that the rubble itself is sitting in a domain that belongs to both of the parties. Inam, the other possibility is Bershus Harabim. The other possibility is that the rubble is in Bershus Harabim, therefore really is in the possession of neither of them. V'baisema Shutzin D'chihai Gavno Lo Kapti Ahadadi. Abos, it could very well be that Halacha Ma'aseh when Reuven and Shimon partners like this, the fact that the rubble is in one of their reshuyos and not the other, because they're generally not makbid on one another, that doesn't create a presumption of ownership, and therefore doesn't trigger Amotzi Mechaver Alav Haraya. Sefer Rabbi says, this is very interesting. So therefore, essentially the Gemara is saying is like this. The Reish and the Sefer really represent two different cases. The Reish's case of Chalkin is literally the building fell down, and you have no way of knowing what happened. So when I have no way of knowing what happened, what do we do? What's the halacha? What's the halacha? Chalkin. And what do we split? We split everything. We just split everything down the middle. That's it. The next case of the Mishnah is when we could see how it collapsed. Did it pancake or did it top? So again, if it toppled, then the majority of, however we're going to split it up still, but the majority of broken bricks, broken stones will belong ultimately again to Reuven, the upper story guy, and the majority of whole bricks or stones will belong to Shimon, the lower story guy. That's going to be the halacha. Good. Says the Gemara. V'imhaya echa mehen makir. Suppose it's interesting. If one of them, however, recognized his stones, then they go to him. So the Gemara is like this. So what's the Gemara says? V'hala matoim. So let's just play this out for just a second, right? So Reuven and Shimon, Reuven's living on top, Shimon's living below. The building collapses. They're going through the rubble, trying to figure out how to assign which rubble to who. And Reuven says, "Oh, that's my stone. That stone over there, that's my stone." What is Shimon saying when Reuven makes this claim, right? So if Shimon is saying, "Yeah, okay, good," so pshita. So I don't understand. So there's nothing to talk about. Vi'i lo amar in. Lamanotel. Now, if Shimon did not say, okay, then why would Reuven be able to take it? In other words, so what's happening over here? Ela da amrle eini yodea. That will say, what's happening over here? Reuven saying, that's my stone. And Shimon saying, what is Shimon saying? I don't know. So the Gemara will say, so therefore the Mishnah says, in that case, Reuven is allowed to take the stone. Say, now, by the way, we saw this before. What does this become? This is a case of Bari B'Shema. Reuven's making a definitive claim. Shimon's making a non-definitive claim. He's just saying, I don't know. So Bari V'Shema Bari Adif. So therefore Reuven's going to win. Reuven's going to win. The Gemara says, by the way, limited to have it to Rav Nachman. This should be a refutation of Rav Nachman. What did Rav Nachman say? The Itmar, so we just saw this. The Itmar, Monalibi, and we're going to see it again. Monalibi Adecha V'Hala Omer Eini Odea. Right? Reuven goes over to Shimon. Shimon, you owe me $1,000. And Shimon says, I don't know. So I can neither confirm nor deny. I don't know if I owe you. So we'll say, what do you do in this kind of case? Rav Huna Rav Yehuda Amri Chayiv. Rav Huna Rav Yehuda say you're Chayiv. Right? Why? Again, Bari V'Shema, Bari Adif. Reuven's making a definitive claim. Shimon's saying, I just don't know. So Reuven's definitive claim wins. Rav Nachman Rav Yochanan Amri Potter. Rav Nachman Rav Yochanan say, no, Shimon doesn't have to pay anything. Why not? Here we go. Kidam Rav Nachman, Kegon Sheyesh Esek Shvua Beinehen. What's the case of Osai? Of Esek Shvua. Again, we'll define what this means just a moment. Hachanami, Kegon Sheyesh Esek Shvua Beinehen. So let's go over here. We're dealing with the case of Esek Shvua. What's the case of Esek Shvua? Hechi Dami Esek Shvua, Kidarava. The Amar Rava, Manali Biyadacha, Vala Omer Ein Lecha Biyadi Ela Chamishim. Vashar Eini Yodeya Mitoch She'en Yachal Shalem Yishava Yishalem. So remember again, we saw this case. Reuven goes over to Shimon and he says, Shimon, you owe me $1,000. Shimon says, listen, I know that I owe you $500. I don't know about the rest. So you would say to yourself, what is that called? What is that called? Moda b'miktsas. In this case over here, you can't apply a shvuah. Why can't you apply a shvuah? Because since Shimon is claiming, I don't know about the rest, you can never take a shvuah on an undefined claim. Right? When someone says, I don't know, so because of that, because you ultimately, again, can't take a shvuah, therefore, again, the halacha is, you have to pay. You have to pay. So therefore, again, the Gemara is suggesting over here that this will be the same type of case. That once ultimately, again, Shimon is saying, I don't know, this becomes like a case of Esek Shvuah, and that way, halacha l'maisa, Reuven gets to take his stone. Okay, interesting case. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi, Esek Shvuah, v'hachanami, kevan demota b'miktsas, v'amar ini yodeh b'miktsas, t'chayiv Shvuah, da'araisa mishum hodah b'miktsas. So as I say, ultimately, again, so the Gemara is going to apply. It's just an interesting, a little bit complicated way to explain this line of the Mishnah, but that's going to be the way that Reuven is able to take the stone that he is claiming is his. We're dealing with the case over here of where Shimon says, halacha l'maisa, I don't know. Okay, but all those slamin achashman. Now watch this. When Reuven identifies the stone that's his, so what happens? What does the Mishnah say? That counts towards his tally. So I'll say, so the Shayna now is going to be, what does that mean? It counts towards his tally. So the Gemara says, "Savar Rav Meimar lefi cheshbon shvura." So we'll say, so now watch this. So let's assume the case is like this, right? Reuven and Shimon are living together in this house. Reuven is on the upper story, Shimon is on the lower story. The house collapses. Let's assume for now that this is a case of cholkin, meaning what? That halacha l'maisa, no one knows how it fell or what happened. So what are we going to do in a case like this? Split everything evenly. So Rava wants to suggest things like this. But let's say, we'll say, just for argument's sake, right? There's 200 stones, right? 200 stones, 100 broken ones, and 100 whole ones. So they'll each get 50 of each. That's the way it's going to work. 100, 50 of each. Now let's say Reuven comes along and says, by the way, that stone over there, that's mine. That's mine. And as we just pointed out, Reuven's going to be believed. So Rabbi say, what cheshbon does that come out of? So Rabbi wants to suggest, essentially, that's not part of Reuven's whole stone cheshbon. Instead, it's part of Reuven's broken stone cheshbon. In other words, Reuven will get the same amount of whole stones that he would have gotten, even had he not identified the stone. Now that he went and he identified a stone, essentially, that takes an additional whole stone from Shimon and now gives it to Reuven. Therefore, Reuven has one less broken stone as part of his tally. So in other words, the identified stone offsets the number of broken stones he's getting. So in other words, the tally of whole stones, that's established. Anything else that you identify, essentially comes out of the other party's whole stone tally. That's actually the way it works. So therefore, diminishing your broken stone amount. Interesting. So again, it comes out of your tally. In other words, it diminishes your tally. So you'll get your number of broken stones -1, because again, essentially, your identified whole stone is taking the place of one of the broken stones. Alma, Kevan de Amar Enio de Areatfe. So everyone will say, what do you see from here? Now, all of this was triggered because remember, when Reuven claims his whole stone, what is Shimon claiming? What's Shimon's response? Shimon's response is, I don't know. I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no. So you see over here, I will say, that unfortunately making a non-definitive claim weakens your possession. You're right? If you don't know, you are in a worse position. Also, by the way, there's a lot of profundity in that statement as well. See, I was saying, a lot of times in life we think that ignorance is an excuse. Right? I didn't know. So, it's reminiscent of the Gemara Mesechus Makos. The Gemara Mesechus Makos talks about someone who kills someone else accidentally. Right, so Reuven's chopping wood Reuven's very busy this morning, right? Reuven's chopping wood in the forest, and what happens? The axe head falls off, or a splinter comes off the wood, kills Shimon. So what's the halacha? Reuven's chayiv, not chayiv for capital, but he's chayiv goes. He goes to exile. The Gemara says it's an accident. To which the Gemara says, "Di'iboy leili yunei." Should have been careful. In other words, I don't know, or I had no idea is not a good excuse. Di'iboy leili yunei. Now, I will say the truth is, if we think about this, it's the same thing in our Yiddishkeit. A lot of times we do things wrong, not because I want to do things wrong, but because I don't know. Okay, ignorance is an excuse up to a point. But once you know that there's things you don't know, then I'm obligated to learn them. Failure to learn them, and therefore continue to make mistakes, is not the defense. There is culpability for that. There's a tremendous yisod in life. You kind of think, this is where the the phrase ignorance is bliss. There really is like there's a godless to that statement, right? The godless to that statement is if you don't know, if you don't know, you don't know, right? There's godless to it, except there's only one problem. It's unequivocally wrong, right? Ignorance is culpability. Once I know that there are things I don't know, I have an obligation to learn them. Failure to learn them, and thereby continuing to make the same mistakes, generates culpability. So I'll say that is, the Gemara says, Kevan da Amar Ini Yodea Reya Tfei. So saying I don't know doesn't create a defense. Saying I don't know actually makes things worse. It's incredible how much. Let's say I know that's not like the greatest pick-me-up drasha, but what it does is sometimes we live in this world of ignorance, and it's so important to Emir Hashem to. Should you bring enough for everyone? Should you bring enough for everyone over there? What's going on over here? Yes, enjoy. I'm kidding around. Enjoy. I just say so the Maisa, right? If ignorance doesn't give you a pass. At the end of the day, ignorance makes you chayiv. Incredible. Amar li Abaye. Abaye says, Adrabo, hareya tfei. So the Adrabo hareya tfei, midahani yada tfei lo yada, su lesle. So I will say, I understand, it should be just the opposite, right? When Reuven goes ahead, and Reuven says, I recognize this stone, but I don't recognize the other stones. That should actually work better. Right? Why does it work better? Because Lamais again, we should say, the fact that you recognize this stone, you don't recognize the other one, maybe what? Wait, what does that say? These are yours, and what? Nothing else's. Tfelo yada. Maybe we'll say, we were looking at this case over here, where Reuven is able to go ahead and identify and say, you know what? This is my stone, right? This is my stone. So we're looking at this as like this. So now, therefore, this is my stone, and therefore, this counts separate and distinct from the entire tally of whole stones that I'm getting. Maybe not. Maybe we should say it's like this. The fact that you can identify this one maybe indicates that what? This one is yours. And maybe you have no other claim to anything else. Obviously, it doesn't mean no other claim. Obviously, because there are other building materials that made up this chilek, right? But Lamaisa, maybe it should erode his claim regarding everything else. Abaye says, no. Lefi cheshbon shlemos. No, this makes a lot more sense. No, what it means is like this. Let's say, so going back to our case, right? There's 200 stones over here. 100 whole ones, 100 broken ones. Reuven and Shimon are going to get 50 of each. Right? Part of Reuven's 50 is going to include what? It's going to include what? the one that he identified. So being able to identify a stone doesn't entitle him to more whole stones, but rather what does it do? It says that halacha l'maisa, this is one of your whole ones. So again, the difference is because you get the one that you identify, but it counts towards your tally of whole stones. To which the Gemara says, okay, ihachi, my kamahanile. So if that's the case, then how did this benefit Reuven? In other words, according to the first approach, where when he identifies a stone, then that's your stone in addition to the tally of whole stones that are yours, great. But according to this approach, where when Reuven identifies a stone, that stone counts towards his tally of whole stones, so then how is he benefited from the identification? The Shmuel says, no, I'll tell you why. L'milbena revacha. Let's say this was a larger stone. It was a cornerstone, right? So in other words, it was some type of unique stone. So there's a benefit to it. Inami tina de ma'avda. Or maybe the stone has mortar that's more refined mortar. In other words, that Reuven is identifying something that has a greater value associated with it, or it performs, or it has some type of unique function, some type of unique aspect. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, it's beneficial to him. But bottom line, halacha l'maisa. So again, if he identifies the stone, and again, we're talking about either a case where Shimon says, I don't know, or agrees, right? Obviously, he agrees, not to that, but even if he says, I don't know, Reuven gets that stone. But halacha l'maisa, again, that stone that he identifies ultimately counts towards his tally of whole stones. Then I will say, just to kind of summarize this entire section, so it comes out of here as follows. Reuven and Shimon, again, are co-owners of a two-story home. Reuven on top, Shimon on the bottom. So halacha l'maisa, the house collapses. What do they do with the debris? So essentially, again, two different cases. Case number one is where we don't know how it fell. We don't know how it fell. Did it pancake? Did it collapse? We don't know how it fell. What's the halacha? Cholkin. In the case of cholkin, if either party is able to identify particular whole stones that belong to them, what's the halacha? And the other party either says, I don't know, or agrees, they get to keep that whole stone. The whole stone that they identify and keep counts as part of their tally of whole stones. So you don't get additional whole stones, that counts as part of your tally. If, however, they're able to see how the home collapsed, if it pancaked, then we see the majority of broken stones belong to the lower story. If it collapsed, the majority of broken stones belong to the upper story. Beautiful. Next Mishnah. So let's begin this at least today. Next Mishnah. Habayis Valia. So this is a fascinating case. Now in this case over here, Rashi points out over here, this is a case of where Reuven owns a two-story home. And let's say for argument's sake right now, Reuven doesn't live in it. He's the owner. Shimon lives in it. Shimon is living in the upper story. Okay, so now, Habayis Valia. Niftecha Aliyah, ve'im balabayis rotz l'takein. So now watch this. So now, Shimon is living in the upper story, and a hole develops in the floor. Now, the floor of the upper story, which is the ceiling of the lower story. Okay? Reuven, the landlord, doesn't want to fix it. Okay? Just put a rug on it, whatever, he doesn't want to fix it. So it says, what's the halacha? So again, Shimon has the right to say, okay, you don't want to fix it, that's fine. I'm moving downstairs because again, it's a little bit easier to navigate in a home with a hole in the ceiling, not the roof, right? The hole in the ceiling, than it is to navigate in a home with a hole in the floor. So Shimon has the right to move downstairs and live downstairs until Reuven fixes the hole in his floor. Rabbi Yossi says, "Hatachto nor senes atikra va'elyones ha'ma'aziva." So we'll say, it sounds like Rabbi Yossi is arguing with the Tanakama. How and why we'll have to see in the Mir Hashem in tomorrow's daf. Rabbi Yossi says the guy living on the lower story, he provides for the ceiling, and the guy living in the upper story, he provides for the layer of plaster. Again, we'll discuss in the Gemara what that is. Well, so let's analyze this. Niftecha b'kama. Rabbi will say, this is great. So it says, here's the case of the Mishnah, right? So remember again, Reuven owns the house, but is not living there right now. Rents out the upper story to Shimon. Now what does the Mishnah say? A hole develops in the floor of Shimon's upper story home. Reuven doesn't want to fix it. Shimon has the right to move downstairs. So it says, now what's the shayla? The shayla is, how big of a hole does there have to be in order to trigger this halacha? So the Gemara says, Rav Amar Beruba. Rav says it has to be that the majority of the floor opened up. Right? In other words, essentially, the space is unlivable. Shmuel Amar Shmuel says Ba'arba. No, even an area for Tfachim, is going to be enough, ultimately, again, to trigger this move, to trigger this right to move. Okay, so let's analyze this. Rav Amar Beruba, Aval Ba'ar Ba'alo. So Rav says, ultimately, it's only if the majority of the floor opens up, but not for Tfachim. Why? Listen to this. We'll say, Adam Dar, Chatziav Vilamata, the Chatziav Lamala. So Rav says, because it's not a problem. It's not a problem. What could Shimon do? Shimon essentially will live on 2 floors. Some stuff he'll do in the upper story, and some stuff he'll do in the lower story, right? He'll do both. Not a big deal. A person can live on 2 different floors. Shmuel says, no. Barba. Shmuel says, once the floor opens up, the area of 4 Tfachim, Ein Adam Dar Chatziav Lamata v'Chatziav Lamala. Ultimately, again, a person can't live, right, half on or it's not right. Shimon has the right to go ahead and live on 1 story. To live on 1 story, I will say, I just mentioned, what a machlokes. What a machlokes. Do we say that Adam Dar, Chatziav Lamala and Chatziav Lamata or lo? Could a person live above and below or only on 1 level? So let's say, you could see how profound this is. Machlokes, not just in halacha, but in ashkafa as well. Now let's say, do we not constantly feel this push and pull? Where I feel like on one hand, my neshama is pulling me to be otherworldly, right? My neshama is pulling me lamala. My neshama is pulling me higher and higher, right? My guf is pulling me lamata, lower and lower. And it feels like my life is so often this tug of war between, on one hand, the desire to be holy and to live lamala, and on the other hand, again, recognize that I am an earthly, physical, material being and live lamata. Can one person simultaneously live lamala and lamata? So apparently, interestingly enough, it's a machlokes, Rav and Shmuel. Rav says a person could live lamala and lamata. Yeah, a person can simultaneously live, ultimately, again, a little bit in Shamayim and on Aretz, in the celestial sphere, in the heavens and in the earth. And Shmuel says, no. A person either lives lamala or they live lamata. Right? When you're alive, you're living in lamata. And if you're dead, you're living lamala. That's the way it works. But a person cannot exist on 2 planes simultaneously. So I will say, who's right? Who's right? How do we paskin? Well, we haven't answered the halacha, but how do we paskin hashkafa l'maisa? How do we paskin? So I will say it is clear that if we paskin like Shmuel, that a person cannot live lamala and lamata. And I will say, the beautiful part about this is as follows, that we don't have to. HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes and addresses this existential anxiety for us. The pasuk says, "Va'anshe kodesh tihiyu li, ubasar basada treifa lo sochelim." So literally again, the text of the pasuk is, "Be holy people to me, basar basada treifa lo sochelim." Do not eat a treifa. Treifa is an animal that is killed by another predatory animal. Can't eat a treifa. So everyone focuses on the second part of the pasuk, because that's halacha. You can't eat an animal that is killed without shchita, and forgets about the first part of the pasuk. The Katzker, I'm not mental of Katz, the Katzker says, the Iker is the first part of the pasuk. Va'anshe kodesh tihiyunli. Chadosh Baruch Hu says, I do not need you to be malachim. I have plenty of malachim. I have legions and legions of angels. I did not put you in this world to be a malach. So why did I put you in this world? The anshe kodesh tihiyunli. Be good human beings. Be good people. See, I will say, we so often think that like the avoda of life is to suppress our humankind, to suppress our physicality, to suppress our material side and be all spiritual. But it's not true. First of all, it's impossible. It's impossible. And it's simply not true. It's not our avoda. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I put you in the physical world to be physical beings. Enjoy the physical world. Even maximize the physical world. Enjoy it responsibly. Enjoy it with Kiddusha. Enjoy it with moderation. But va'anshe kodesh tiyuni. Just be holy people living in a physical and material world. Obviously, pursue lives of Kiddusha. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, never think for a moment that your goal is to be more malach than man. That is never your goal. That is never your goal. And to create a life in which that is your goal, is the truth is setting yourself up for a life filled with existential tension. Anshe kodesh tiyuni. I don't ask you to be malachim. I just ask you to be holy people. So we'll say, that's how he passed like Shmuel. Shmuel says, Ein Adam Dar. Ein adam dar, chatziav lamata, chatziav yilamala. Doesn't work. A person can't live half the time in Shamayim and half the time on Aretz. When I'm here until 120, I'm in the Aretz. And then again after 120, I'm dar lamala. That's it. You can eliminate the existential tension that so often we go through. I will say, sometimes we get this flood chinuch that our goal is to be more malach than man. Who says? If I can't, I don't need you malachim. I don't need you to malachim. I have malachim. What do I need from you? I need you to be anshe kodesh tehiyunli. I need you that when you're in this world, be dar lamata. I need you to maximize your time in this world. I need you to find kiddush on the material. After 120, Emir Hashem, then you'll be dar lamala. Machlokis, Rabbi Shmuel, not just in halacha, but in hashkafa. We haven't get into halacha yet, but at least in hashkafa, ultimately we pass that shalom. Let's just go another 2 lines, then we'll stop. Sehechi dami, what's the case? Ida Amar Aliyazu Azda Seif Ruvain rented Shimon. He said to him, I'm renting you this aliyah, this upper story. Then Azda. And also remember again, when you have such a specific rental, so in this case over here, where there's a hole in the floor and it's no longer usable, so that aliyah is gone. There's nothing more to talk about. And therefore, again, the truth is, Reuven shouldn't really have any more responsibility. Elo de Amrle aliyah stam. Rather, what happened? So Shimon went ahead, Reuven rented to Shimon, an aliyah stam. He said, I'm renting you an aliyah, an upper story. If that's the case, lo gelachrisa, if there's a hole in the floor, then let Reuven rent Shimon another aliyah somewhere else. Amarava lo tzricha de amrle aliyah zu shani maskir lecha. Ki salka salik ba'ada v'chi nochis chavas ba'ada. Rather, Rabbi says, very interesting. What did Reuven say to Shimon? Reuven said to Shimon, I am renting you this aliyah. When it is kisalka, when it is standing, go up in it. And when it is not standing, go down in it. So inherent in the rental itself was the recognition that I'm renting you the upper story, but if for some reason the upper story is not usable, then what? You can go ahead and go downstairs and use the lower story. So if that's the case again, so obviously then when there's a hole in the floor, so that of course then Shimon is allowed to go downstairs and use the structure, use the downstairs. So I will say what he's saying over here is, I'm renting to you this aliyah that is on top of this bias. So what does that mean? Tahashabed le bias la aliyah. What he's doing is he's going in and being meshabed. So I will say, interestingly enough, what he's going over here is he's essentially being meshabed. He is almost like, what's the right word for meshabed? He is almost like he is encumbering almost the use of the lower story to the upper story. In other words, when he says I'm going ahead and ultimately giving you this aliyah, this upper story that is standing on top of this lower story, he's being meshabed the lower story to the upper story. So should the upper story no longer be usable, you get automatic use of the lower story. So we'll end off with this. He says, so I'll say, so this is reminiscent of another case where Reuven said to Shimon, I'm selling you this vine, and the vine rests on top of a peach tree. Now what happened? The nekar farsek, and then the peach tree was uprooted. What's the halacha? Uba ma'aseh v'nei Rabbi Chia. This case came over Rabbi Chia. Parsek calls mashadalas kayama. And again, Rabbi Chia paskin, you have to replant the peach tree because since the nature of the sale of the vine was such that halacha l'maaseh, it's a vine on top of a peach tree. So as long as the vine is in existence, you would have to make sure that the peach tree is there as well. So both says, therefore, bringing this full circle, the Gemara suggests over here that the case we're dealing with must be where Reuven, remember, so again, Reuven is the owner of the 2-story home. Reuven rented the upper aliyah, you rented the upper story to Shimon, but the way that he rented it to Shimon is he said, I'm renting you the upper story that is situated on top of the lower story. Now, obviously, that's pretty intuitive, but the fact that he's going ahead and saying it like that indicates that he is ultimately also aligning the use of the lower story with the upper story. Meaning, how does Allah understand it? That should, for some reason, the upper story no longer be usable, you can what? Move downstairs and use the lower story. Now, the machlokes Rav and Shmuel is still in existence. How unusable Does the upper story have to be in order to trigger use of the lower story? So that's the machlokes, right? So ultimately, again, Rav is going to say the majority of the floor opened up. Shmuel says 4 tefachim opened up. Resolution of that machlokes in Eretz Hashem tomorrow. Shkach, I will say.